So with a proximal hamstring strain, we've gone through that early phase of rehab. We've gone through maybe some things involving isometric tolerance, working in some eccentrics. We're starting to get back to more of the isotonic and potentially plyometric related activity that sometimes can be really, really tricky with that proximal hamstring strain. What are some considerations for this period of time, especially when you're trying to kind of bridge them in a direction where they're back to running, maybe through sports, or maybe through running from a leisure standpoint as well?
The first thing we need to do is we need to make sure we know what their available range of motion is, just from a total arc of motion, but then also what can they tolerate as well. So this is where I think taking them through some more extensive and more demanding mobility work and teasing into some of their end range abilities, whether we're looking at end range hip flexion, a straight leg raise, a toe touch progression, and then finding ways to add variety to that, either from multiplanar demands and adding in other body parts with it versus just an isolated static stretch or a static hold is important. But if you have a good grasp of what they can do from a mobility standpoint in an unloaded or minimally resisted or loaded environment, it opens up your windows for what we can start training within. And when we look at training, it's kind of that balance between direct hamstring loading in both bilateral and unilateral environments, open and closed chain, and then more of just your GPP type activities that you're doing as part of a well-balanced lower body strength training program. So I think all of the early phase stuff that you did from an isometric, eccentric standpoint, you can continue that and just progressively load and increase the demand of load and resistance with those tasks. You can increase, I don't want to say complexity, but maybe the variety of direct hamstring training that you're doing. But more and more, their overall strength training program should just look like a well-balanced workout routine. During this phase, if we're getting ready to run, we also want to start to add in some degree of plyometric training, and an often area that I think is either overlooked or just not spent enough time on is looking at their ability to differentiate absorbing and producing force in and out of loaded positions. So snap downs and depth drops are two very good ways that you can look at eccentrically loading that hamstring, getting them into that hinged or bent hip position as they're decelerating. How well do they tolerate that? And then on the opposite side, putting them in a preloaded position for some of your non-counter movement jumping tasks. And how well can we jump and can we explode out of that position? And this is sometimes where I tease around and I may coach or cue them to jump or get into positions that may look a little bit more hingy in nature so that we are using that forceful hip extension to either come out of that position or to load into that position, not necessarily because it's the most specific to what they're going to be doing on the field or with their sport, but to really bias loading of the hamstring, almost in like a worst case scenario.